Jalen Rayner, man, myth, legend? I would say yes to all of those. But the question is not about that. It's about, is he the right quarterback for Iowa State?
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, my name is Nick Marovets, and today we are talking about Iowa State football. As we do most days here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to go ahead and start with Jalen Rayner. Is he the right guy for Iowa State, coming from Arkansas State, from the Sun Belt, moving up to Power 4 to the Big 12? Is that the right play for the Cyclones? Then we'll talk a little bit about the offense as a whole. I would say over the last few weeks, on average, we've probably talked more about the defense, and I am extremely excited about the defense, but today we're going to dive more so into the offense and kind of what I'm expecting, kind of what we're looking at here. How does Jaylen Raynor fit into this offense? And then finally, to round out today's show, we're going to talk about the tight ends. And these are the two position groups that were interviewed just over the last few days, both coaches for those position groups, and then Jaylen Raynor and Keaton Roscop, if you remember, was one of the, I believe, maybe the first Iowa State player from last season to announce that he was going to be staying. We talked about, I believe, that specific announcement on this show. If you're subscribed, you probably remember that. If you aren't subscribed, you probably should, so you don't miss that kind of stuff. Nonetheless, that's where we're going to go ahead and finish today's episode, diving into the tight end room. But let's start with Jaylen Raynor. The question is Jaylen Raynor built for the Big 12? Is he a good fit for Iowa State? And the short answer is, in my opinion, yes. Now, let me dive into actually why. Because I can see already the keyboard warriors out there talking about, oh, what did he do when he was at Arkansas State? What was actually accomplished? Well, I have it pulled up for you right here, and I am not afraid to go through this because I don't think it really matters, okay? Looking back through his game log in 2025, he lost to Iowa State, of course, 24-16, number 14 ranked, I believe, at the time. An 8-point loss. We all know that game, we remember that game, okay? It was very hot. It was the end of a 4-game streak for Iowa State. Obviously, the first 4 wins for Iowa State over the last season. Nonetheless, very tough first 4 games. It was talked about a lot last offseason. Iowa State didn't play great in that game. Arkansas State kept it close. Nonetheless, Iowa State won. That was the only opponent that Arkansas State faced last season that was ranked. Okay. They did also lose a couple other games late in the season. They lost to Kansas State and ULM right after Iowa State. They had a 4-game losing streak after their win over SEMO. So I went back to 2024. What did Jaylen Raynor and Arkansas State do in 2024? Well, after their first 2 games of the season, they played Michigan, where they lost by 10. Then they lost to Iowa State, 52-7. I believe that one was in Jack Trice. The rest of the way, they lost to Texas State. They lost to Louisiana. Lost to Old Dominion. I thought it was almost said ULM there for a second. Couple of tough losses there. But I will say, it looks like it was a defensive issue. The losses, well, granted, they didn't score a lot of points in the Texas State loss, but they gave up 41. They gave up 55 against Louisiana, and they gave up 40 against Old Dominion. Not that the scores were particularly close in those games, but that's a lot of points to give up. And I don't think Jaylen Raynor plays defense. Then when we look at 2023, no massive games here for Jaylen Raynor. All right, so we're not really building a super strong resume is my point. Losses to NIU, Marshall, I think that's, what is this? This isn't Jacksonville. South Alabama. It says USA. University of South Alabama. Okay, I can see that. Coastal Carolina, Troy. A couple tough losses in the Sun Belt, right? You would expect, if this guy's coming up to the Power 4 level, he's been dominating at the lower ranks, right? Well, here's the thing. As I kind of alluded to in there, first off, Jaylen Raynor does not play all 22 positions on offense and defense. He is the quarterback. I didn't look at every single box score in there, and I didn't really have to because, to be honest, we'll get to the box score more in a second here. That was brought up by Keith Heckendorf, I believe, was the one that brought that up. But nonetheless, Jaylen Raynor is not in charge of wins and losses. those fall too heavily on the quarterback, in my opinion. There is way too many other positions, and the coaches are the ones putting those players in those positions. So I am going to completely ignore Jalen Raynor's win-loss record at Arkansas State. And I think that's a fair thing to do. Some aren't going to agree with me, and that's totally fine. What I am more focused on, the reason I think that Jalen Rayner is the right fit for Iowa State, or at least is a solid option, is the amount of experience that he has. When you go look back through his game log, he's played in some big stadiums like Michigan and Jack Trice. Like, it's a big house, right? The big house and Jack Trice. Big crowds, right? Didn't get it done in those environments, but played in them and played a lot of games, a lot of snaps, right? A lot of opportunity to get better, right? Every single play is an opportunity to get better. And then if you've played college football, you know this. And if you haven't, I feel like it's a pretty well understood that every one of those plays is going to be heavily dissected over the course of the next week or the offseason, or at some point you will see just about every single play that you were a part of, and you can learn from that. So more snaps equals more good, in my opinion, in this case. The other piece of this puzzle, which I feel like we've kind of glossed over ever since the announcement of the commitment, is that Keith Heckendorf, his quarterback coach at Arkansas State, came with him. And so he's familiar with that coach, with Coach Heckendorf, right? He's familiar with his style. Coach Heckendorf is familiar with what Jalen Rayner is capable of. And they're effectively able to work what his strengths are into the offense a little bit better because of that prior relationship. I think that's worth at least noting. There is something to be said about if you know the coach, if you're familiar with the coach is familiar with you. As you get put into a new system, you're not going to be put in as many positions where you're not ready or you're not in a good position to succeed because of your specific skill set. I think that's a big key piece in this that it's worth mentioning. Speaking of Coach Heckendorf, he talked about the fact that there's good football everywhere. And this is, I believe I brought this up already, but look at Trinidad Chambliss and what he did at Ole Miss last season. I am not saying that Jalen Rayner has to do what Trinidad Chambliss did or that he will or that he won't. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying there is a point here to what Keith Heckendorf is saying, to Coach Heckendorf's point. There's good football players just about everywhere, especially with the transfer portal and with the NIL situation. We talk about this all the time. It's kind of flattened out the playing field, right? So you've got your Alabamas, your Georgias, your LSU, your SEC schools that previously had like 3 or 4 really good players, especially a quarterback, where you can only play one at a time. We've all seen the pictures of Alabama wide receivers or the Alabama quarterback room where there was just 4 dudes that are all in the NFL now and are all like ripping defenses apart. And it's like, how do they all get at the same place? Well, because they wanted to play for Alabama. They didn't want to go play for so-and-so and not get as much attention. There's something to be said about the transfer portal flattening out the curve. So the guys who were at Alabama and decided to transfer, we've effectively flattened the spike. Almost like makes me think of, what do they flatten the curve? Like with COVID? Like if you look at Alabama and Georgia and LSU and all these like top tier schools, they are like holding majority of the good quarterbacks. And then if you flatten that out, well, each school has at least one, but more schools have one. They don't have like 2 or 3 really, really good options, which then pushes out the mid-tier Power 4s and the lower-tier Power 4s, and everybody gets pushed out, if that makes sense. If you can think of the middle as like the top-tier programs, the Power 5 of the Power 5 or the Power 4 of the Power 4, and then you get out to, you know, your solid Power 4s, your lower-tier Power 4s, and then you get to your like Sun Belt, that MAC, those, would that be G6, and then you get to your Division II and pushed out even further and further and further. That's my point, is that those schools on the outskirts that aren't in the dead center of that graph, which, you know, if you tweet at me, I could draw out exactly what I'm talking about here. Those schools have better quarterbacks. They have better talent now. And so Jalen Rayner is not some guy who just picked up a football last week. He's a legitimate solid quarterback, and he has a ridiculous amount of reps. He has a ridiculous amount of football knowledge. And the fact that he has a coach that's willing to, or is going to be able to communicate with the offensive staff because he's on the offensive staff and develop an offensive system that really plays to Jalen Raynor's strengths. I like Jalen Rayner in this situation. Now, I don't think, to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything that he's the official starter. It would be pretty wild, I think, to call that right now at April 21st. But I think that's kind of where we're trending here. So this whole segment was focused on that. I think he does make the most sense for Iowa State in this situation. You're going to get a ton of Iowa fans. You're going to get a ton of other Big 12 fans. Oh, you're starting a Sun Belt quarterback. Well, I think first off, this is becoming much more common. Look at what Iowa did last season, right? I don't think it's really that strong of an argument. And two, we have yet to see what he can do in a game for Iowa State. We've seen what he could do over the last few years, but in this system, on this team with these guys around him, what can he do? I actually have extremely high hopes. He talked about a couple, wide receivers he's gelling with well, and it sounds like the entire locker room is just in a phenomenal spot. So I am super excited about Jalen Rayner. I think there's a lot of points that point to him being extremely successful for Iowa State. I feel like that's a good question, right? Is he the real, is it worth Iowa State playing a Sun Belt quarterback? I think so. I absolutely think so. And part of it is going to be how they structure the offense. Let's dive into that just a little bit more coming up right here after this. But first, a word from our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, where every possession matters. Every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. Here is what I personally like about it. You can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. And during the playoffs, the extra insight really matters when you're looking at stars, role players, and key moments. It just makes the entire playoff experience more engaging from start to finish. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Iowa State's offense is going to be kind of the key driver of points this upcoming season, or at least I would anticipate that's going to be the case. Defense can score as well, but generally speaking, offenses score more points than defenses. And I don't know if you know this, offenses, well, I shouldn't say offenses. Teams need to score more points than their opponents to win. So the offense is kind of a big part of that equation. Therefore, curious how Iowa State, with this whole new roster staff, is going to formulate this offense to score points to win games. That's the ultimate goal of a football team. We're going to dive into what I'm expecting here in just a second. But first, thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I want to remind you can get Locked On Cyclones ad-free with the Everydayer Club, plus members-only Discord access. Join at LockedOnCyclones.supercast.com or in the link in the show notes in the description down below. I appreciate it more than you guys know. Could not do this without you. All right, let's go ahead and talk about what this offense could look like. For Jalen Rayner, I am expecting a bit of almost like command center type of quarterback. I don't know for sure what this is, what we're looking at here, but I think it's going to demand a lot from Jalen Rayner, and I think he is going to be in charge. That's my guess right now. Based on a few of the comments from Keith Heckendorf, based on the way that Jalen Rayner's kind of been talking about it, I anticipate a situation where you might get 2 plays. You might get, who knows, maybe even more than 2 plays. You might have the ability to call to any set of 5 plays that the offense kind of has under their wing. I guess I don't know if that's the best analogy, but for example, if you go into a game, there's play A, B, C, D, E. It's a deep shot, a power run, a quick slant, a sweep, and then maybe some sort of passing progression scheme that sets up well against zone. I'm just literally coming up with 5 possible plays. And then I guess didn't say anything against man. So let's say coach calls in a man play, a passing play to beat man, right? In theory, in this concept, Jalen Rayner would be able to call any one of those 5 audibles. So if he likes the way the box is set up for a power run, I don't think I assigned it a letter, but let's say it's B, and it's, I don't know, maybe it's to the right? So it's R&B, It's right B, power to the right. Now, it would never be that simple. That would pretty much just give it away within the first 6 minutes of the game. Anytime those audibles were called, I'm pretty sure the defense would figure it out. But my point is, could have like a group of plays that are able to be audible to at any point. Maybe Jalen Rayner is going to get a handful of plays, take a look at the defense, call some can-cans, some alerts, switch it up at the line. It sounds to me this is going to be more like they keep calling it pro style, and I don't really have a great answer for what that means. Is it under the not in the gun, under the center? Is it the ability to call those kinds of audibles? I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I anticipate a large amount of responsibility will be placed on Rayner. And at the end of the day, this quote stood out to me from Heckendorf talking about, he said, quote, "If you're decisive and you're accurate, you're right." There's an element of truth to that. Okay. Everything can be interpreted as right or wrong. And I think in a lot of cases, you can make a case both ways, right? Like a throw over the middle could definitely be right or wrong, whether or not it was on target, obviously the accuracy of that component, whether or not they threw it on time, that's kind of the decisive portion of that. And whether or not, I suppose, if there were other open wide receivers, that would be one of the not mentioned by Heckendorf equation or portions of that equation, right? So if you threw it on time and accurate, even if he wasn't open, technically you could probably argue that that was a good play. If it hit him in the hands, if it wasn't thrown in harm's way, like you could say, okay, I could see where you were thinking. Maybe this developed a little bit late, whatever. Like that's what Heckendorf is talking about here. And especially it goes the other way, right? If you make the right decision, but your timing is off or your accuracy is off, you were wrong, essentially. You threw a pick. That's an easy way to look at it going the other way. And so they're putting a lot of trust in Jalen Rayner in this situation. And we'll see if he's able to handle it. But I do expect this offense, in a way, especially in the passing game, to be Jalen Rayner's and Jalen Rayner's alone. I'm sure there will be wide receiver influence and this, that, and the other. But I am excited about it. I think this is a little, and we saw a little bit of this last year with Rocco when they mentioned, I think it was Mauser that brought it up. You know, we gave him 2 plays in that situation, talking specifically, I believe, about the Kansas State game. And we talked about how good that was for Iowa State, how important it was for them to give the quarterback some control. I think there is a lot of truth in that, and it stays relevant for this year's team. I think if you have Jalen Rayner out there, you lean on his experience. You lean on his ability to read defenses and to make his own decisions. Whether his decision is right or wrong is kind of determined by his decisiveness, his accuracy, and, of course, the success of the play. At the end of the day, whether or not it was the right call is kind of dependent on how the play ends up. If it ends up in a touchdown, okay, great. It was the right call. Like, was he technically open? Did a few things that were like never seen before have to happen for him to score? Yeah, okay, maybe. But he scored, so it's the right thing. Same thing can be said of a bad play, right? Was it a weird tipped ball that ended up being an interception going the other way? It was probably the wrong call, whether you like it or not. And I am very interested to see what exactly that looks like for Jalen Rayner. But I anticipate a lot more, like I said, a lot more responsibility falling on him. And then obviously there will be a lot of communication. And that's what these guys have been working on up until this point. It sounds like to me, obviously they're getting reps, but there's been a ton of emphasis on the mental side of this. So from what I understand, every single rep, the guys are stepping or dropping back and kind of throwing the ball, right? Making their decision on where they're going to throw it. And then in the meeting room, Coach Heckendorf is asking, maybe Moberly was in, but asking Rayner who was throwing on the side if he threw to a different guy. Not that he's actually throwing the ball, just to be clear. He's back there just walking through the rep, essentially. If he were to, quote unquote, throw it to a different guy or a different wide receiver, why'd he do that? And then Heckendorf is looking for the why. Not where did you throw it? Why did you choose to throw it there? And if you can't get a good answer, well, that's not a good thing, first off. But if you can at least get an answer, you can either work to change that thought process. If it was like, okay, maybe we don't want that kind of a thought process, but you can also use that knowledge, going forward and formulating an offense and understanding how they're seeing defenses and how the formula of, or not the formula, the pace of a game and the feel for a game, what these quarterbacks are looking at, they can understand what they're putting these quarterbacks into position wise and how successful they're going to be. I'm actually really excited about that portion of the offense. I think I'm most excited about the run game, but for now, it does kind of sound like the passing game is going to be dependent on what the quarterback sees, which is extremely exciting. That being said, we do have to break down a new position group. We've talked a lot about the offensive line, the running backs, now the quarterbacks, talked a lot about the defense. We haven't really dove into the tight ends. We're going to do that coming up right here after this. Iowa State's tight ends last season, I thought were one of the biggest strong points on the team. I thought it was one of the areas where Iowa State could absolutely win games, and they would probably have to. I don't know if they're in the same spot this season, but I do think that the ideology, the mentality of the entire team has carried over to the offense, to the tight ends, and that's extremely exciting. We're talking about it here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for hitting subscribe down below after that last take. That was pretty cool of you. All right. So we have talked a lot about the defense and the mentality, the aggressiveness, the physicality that this team is going to play with. And I'm not going to recap all of that right now, but there is a huge element of, I don't know if Iowa State's going to win one game or if they're going to win 10 games, but the teams that they play are going to feel it a week after, 2 weeks after. I don't know how, thinking delayed onset muscle soreness. How long does the soreness last? Against a team like Iowa State, it could be months, the way that they are talking about these guys flying around. And it sounds like it's transferring over to the offense, to the tight end specifically. From coach of the tight end, Seth Hestness, I'm going to just call him Coach Hestness. He said, I want this to be the most physical room in the nation, which I think is important for tight ends especially. They have a very interesting position description. Obviously have to block, have to be out in the field catching passes. They're that perfect mesh, if you will, between the run and the pass game. We've talked about the same thing on the defensive side from the linebackers. You could think of the secondary as a predominantly passing portion of the defense and the line as a predominantly run-stopping portion of the defense. Of course, they sack, and of course, the secondary makes tackles on the outside. I understand that it goes both ways, but linebackers are kind of responsible for both. Same thing at the offense, right? Your wide receivers are pass catchers and your running backs are runners for the most part. Your tight ends do it both. And so they have to have a different kind of mentality. And I have a few points that I want to get into here, but Keaton Roscop talked about he's super excited to block. Now, the guy's down the down the medical pre-med path, which is surprising to me that he would be so excited to block just from a pre-med guy, but you love to see that. And he talked about how intense the practices are right now. The almost Army, military style intensity in these practices, I think is going a long way. It almost takes all of the emotion out of it. There is no want, you just do. They talked about going from Hestness, going to rip the face off of a defensive lineman, right? Winning those one-on-ones. Those are pretty intense words. It's what's required of a tight end, but it's not something that a lot of people are just oh, we're going to go. It doesn't sound fun. That type of mentality, I think, is a lot harder to get on the offensive side of the ball because you're trying to accomplish a task. You're trying to correctly, especially my mind goes from wide receiver, right? So at wide receiver, you're firing off the line, watching the ball, not listening, firing off the ball, getting to 5 yards, quick stutter step, outbreaking release. You were getting pressed, so you've got to keep distance from the defensive back. After you're outbreaking, you've got 3 yards. So is that the true 6 steps that you practice coming out of a stutter step, or is it actually more like 10? Either way, you get the 3 yards, and then you come to a comeback, which would be an outward pivoting, essentially curl to the boundary, right? Kind of sounds like a lot because it kind of is, especially when you consider there's a defender in there, but you've got to attack that level of extreme timing, positioning, and speed with like an intensity that it's just hard. It's difficult to manage all of those things. On defense, it's just like get to the ball as fast as you physically can and run them over. It's a different game. So for tight ends to have that, they can kind of have that a little bit. They're a little bit closer to an offensive lineman. They can kind of have that, I'm just going to run you over mentality. And I think that will carry over. That intensity, that fire will carry over to the rest of the offense. And there are going to be moments in games where the offense isn't really clicking. It's not really firing on all cylinders. Maybe a couple 3-and-outs or a couple stalled drives, a couple punts in a row. What's going to happen? Send out a tight end and run somebody over. Send out a tight end in a 12 or 13 personnel, which did get Hestness fired up, and just plow somebody directly onto their rear end and get the rest of the offense fired up. Like that will do it. That will absolutely do it. Last point I wanted to touch on here when it came to specifically Roscop, because this was brought up multiple times. So this is kind of a dual point. Roscop talked about staying because of the fans. Fans played a huge role in that. He was talking about, what was he going to post when it was, if you remember back to early December, to mid to late December, right around Christmas, it was a very chaotic, emotional time. He talked about that a little bit, but he said he stayed because of the fans. And back to Jaylen Raynor, when Jalen Rayner reached out to Rocco and asked, like, basically what to expect, he said to embrace the fan base. Just wanted to throw that in there, because I do think the Iowa State has a very special fan base, loyalty aspect. I'm not going to sit here and say that Iowa State's been one of the best programs in the country over the last 10 years. I'm not going to sit here and say that Iowa State's, in the best position over the next 10 years. But I know that the fan base is going to show up every single day, every single week. And I know that the tailgating scene is going to be insane, whether it's rain or shine or snow. I know that the stands are going to be filled, at least at the start of every single game. I will say we should probably work on standing on third downs, getting loud when they're in the huddle, when the opposing team's in the huddle, staying after halftime, those kinds of things. But everybody, I feel like, deals with that a little bit. Iowa State fans show up, whether it's football, basketball, wrestling. And I just kind of want to throw that in there. Like, be proud of that. If you're watching this, you are an Iowa State fan, and you are a part of that equation. Keeping players, bringing players in. Yes, talent, championship pedigree, location, money, all of those things play a role. By talent, I mean other guys on the team or girls on the team, whatever it is. That plays a role. But the fans are also a part of that equation. The intensity, the I suppose, love for the game, like, that is a part of it. And Hilton Magic and Pack the Jack and all of these different, essentially portions of the fan base is kind of the best way to think about it, because I feel like we're all Iowa State fans at the end of the day, but it plays a role. And so is it like the biggest point? No, that's why we played it at the very end. But both of those guys bringing it up, to me, just showed they're obviously not so much Jalen Rayner, but Keaton staying at Iowa State, his love for the city, for the culture, for Iowa State and what it is, and it being a point of emphasis from Rocco to Jalen, like, these people are legit. They will love you till basically you're no longer there. And even if you aren't there, right? That's not a quote. That's just me thinking out loud. I imagine there will be a fair amount of Iowa State fans that watch Penn State. There are tons of Iowa State fans that watch the 49ers before, they didn't have any NFL affiliation. Now that Purdy is there, that's like what they watch. So just worth thinking about, putting it on your brain here on this Tuesday. I appreciate you making this your first watch or listen of the day. Could not do this without you. If you haven't already, hit subscribe down below, because it's a Cyclone state. We're proving that, I think, day by day. Guys sticking around, coming to Iowa State. Cyclone fans are legit. It's going to do it for today. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.